Powered by Riverside FM.
Earlier this July, while walking back to the office from a lunch break, I was a partial witness to an accident. I was walking on Gracechurch Street, a busy road in central London that runs from Monument to Liverpool Street. The street is especially busy with buses, taxis, and cyclists, including those on the rented electric Lime bikes. In addition to the traffic, there are many pedestrians, others like me who are popping out for lunch. Most of those pedestrians stick to the pavements, although some choose to cross the street, and when they choose to cross, they seldom do so at the designated crossing points. They often take their chances and cross wherever they can. Hence, it is not uncommon for there to be some honking and shouting on the street. On this particular occasion, I'd seen some traffic, including cyclists, stopped at the junction of a crossroads. When it started up again, they progressed down the street at great pace where a number of people had been crossing. I heard some shouting, and then saw in the distance about 100 to 200 meters in front of me, contact between a pedestrian and a cyclist. The pedestrian who had been crossing had their trailing leg hit the side of a cyclist, which seemed to unsteady the cyclist. The cyclist wobbled from side to side and then fell off. I had only a partial and not full view of this. My view was obscured by others on the pavement and the traffic on the road. Indeed, the pavement in front of me was very busy. I would estimate there were probably 50 other people between me and the incident. Hence, I couldn't see exactly what had happened. At this point, and in full transparency, I felt I faced something of a dilemma. The self-centered part of me was focused on finishing my lunch break, returning to the office, and getting on with my day's work. Part of me also hoped the person was okay, but if they were not okay, it didn't want to see what had happened out of squeamishness. However, I also knew that there had been an accident. I'd possibly seen something, and there was a risk that someone was hurt. I really did have to check that they were okay. Actually, this dilemma was resolved straightforwardly, since I was already walking in the direction of the accident. So I carried on along the street towards the incident. On my way towards the incident, I must have passed another 20 or so people. And when I got there, there was already a group of probably around 10 people attending to a man who was lying on the ground. It was hard to assess his condition. He was okay, in inverted commas, in the sense that he was clearly conscious, but he was lying on the ground, and he did seem to be touching his head. Fortunately, only about 30 seconds to a minute later, 2 vans came around the corner and the City of London police turned up. At this point, whilst I paused, I decided there was nothing further that I could do, especially with the arrival of at least one of the emergency services. I then proceeded to walk on. And this is the response that I want to analyse. In concluding the short anecdote, I've indicated that there's some ambiguity about whether the person was okay or not. Did I do all I could do? I think the answer is no, since in fact I did nothing. You'll notice in my description I referred a number of times to the large number of other people who were present. Therefore, in not doing more, the question that I'm asking is, was I guilty of something known as the bystander effect? The bystander effect is a well-documented psychological phenomenon where people are less likely to offer help, in particular to victims of crime, where other people are present. In fact, the effect alleges that the more bystanders there are, the less personal responsibility each individual person feels, which can lead to both personal inaction but also inaction across the group as a whole. The rationale for this is really simple. In terms of responsibility, essentially, each person assumes that someone else will take action so that they don't need to. There is also a degree of social influence, in that you monitor the behavior of others to determine how to act. If no one else is helping, you may interpret the situation as non-urgent. The bystander effect has been quite widely discussed and features in many popular science books. The most famous alleged example of this effect is the 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese. She was stabbed to death outside the apartment building where she lived in New York City. 2 weeks after her murder, the New York Times published an article claiming that 37 witnesses saw or heard the attack, and that none of them called the police or came to help her. This has subsequently been discredited, both in terms of the number of witnesses and their apathy, but it is one of the original incidents which led to the formation of the bystander effect. Returning to the incident I witnessed, I think there was some element of the bystander effect present, both for me, but also for the others. There were certainly a lot of people around, and a lot of people did not help. My original estimate was probably 50 other people would have witnessed the incident, and yet when I reached the place where the person was lying on the ground, there were maybe only 10 proactively helping. Perhaps the major mitigation to the incident that I would call out was the rapid arrival of the police, and whilst they are not medical professionals, they are much more likely to be able to ensure that such professionals do arrive promptly. Related to the bystander effect, but on a lighter note, I was going to return to the instinct I described earlier of not wishing to disturb the end of my lunch break. At that point, I'd had lunch, and I wished to return to the office to get on with things. In some sense, any other incident at all was going to be an inconvenience to me. And here I'm going to refer to a concept known as the somebody else's problem field, introduced by the author Douglas Adams in his novel Life, the Universe, and Everything, part of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. In that book, the somebody else's problem field is a form of cloaking device that makes things invisible. It's thrown over something so that we can't or don't see it, as our brain doesn't let us see it because we think it is somebody else's problem. What this is getting at is that essentially people naturally ignore things they believe aren't their responsibility. In the book, the field taps into this tendency, making objects effectively invisible simply because observers subconsciously decide they don't need to pay attention to them. In real life, this effect offers a convenient psychological escape from uncomfortable situations. It's a method for getting through some parts of life without shouldering all of the world's problems. But it poses a real risk for us and our own accountability, and our ability to face into and then overcome difficult situations. We must recognize that it's not always somebody else's problem, but sometimes a shared problem.